saying for some time that this much Pacific, these grand plans that they've got to try to have more influence in the region around China cannot be that we are right off our own backyard. That's why we oppose cuts to the armed forces. That's why we've been urging a closer, more constructive relationship with the European Union and building resilience in Britain. But the urgent thing right now is to get these sanctions right and get them tightened, and to set up this community sponsorship scheme, which hasn't even started yet. The extraordinary times, they call for extraordinary measures, and we should be taking the same approach to this as we took to COVID and mobilising everything that we've got. I spoke to charities today who told me that the existing scheme takes 2 years to get in Britain. We can allow people to wait that long. It's just unconscionable, and we've got to step up and do more right now.
Lisa Nandy, the little electric birds trying to make their way from Wigan to London are struggling, but thank you so much for that. Much appreciated. Caroline Wheeler, the point that I was attempting to make there was that there are big economic hits coming for ordinary families in petrol prices, fuel prices generally, food prices probably, and then the national insurance rise, as well as everything else. And although that obviously gives the Conservatives some real problems ahead and the Chancellor some really big difficult choices ahead, it's not that easy for the opposition parties either, is it?
No, it's not, because one of the problems we have here is that we have a Labour Party which, historically has spent a lot of money and has always been sort of outspending the government. So when we see the government looking at these particular issues, it's then difficult for the Labour Party to come in and say, oh, well, we'll spend more, because people also understand that there just isn't very much left in the coffers now. We've just gone through a pandemic. Yeah. There really isn't much there. We've had to introduce a tax rise to pay for the backlog in hospitals that haven't, hospital operations that haven't been able to happen during the pandemic. That is going to put a squeeze on families, but equally, what's the alternative? We know that we have record debt levels, and it's very difficult to balance those books. And of course, we're going to see the Chancellor come to the dispatch box within the next 2 weeks to give his spring statement. So we'll find out more then about some of his plans to deal with some of these issues.
I'm joined as well by Ben Kentish, our Westminster correspondent. Ben, one Conservative said to me even this morning,
in a quarter of a mile at Wagoners Roundabout, take the second exit onto the Parkway, A312.
It depends what happens in Ukraine. I mean, yes, it's very plausible. There were reports this week that energy bills could hit £3,000 to £4,000 a year. That was seen by some as a bit of an unrealistic figure. I was speaking to a government source yesterday who said, no, that's very plausible. Now, of course, that affects consumers, Andrew, but it also has a huge impact on business and therefore other costs. Inflation was, even before all this, forecast to hit at least 6% this year. No one expects it now to stay that low, and that will have huge repercussions for not just business,
really big, yeah. Very interesting what Lisa Nandy was saying in that relatively short interview I was doing with her. She said that when it came to Labour's offer on visas, you could tear up all the silly paperwork. They did understand that people didn't always have old passports and all the rest of it, and they'd make it much easier. That's a different tone than we heard from Ed Miliband this morning. It does seem that Labour policy under the surface is changing as well.
It is shifting, Andrew. They are united with the government in the belief that the sort of security checks that are
exit the roundabout onto the Parkway.
To lift those. What they do want to
continue on the Parkway for 1 mile.
Criteria that people have to meet to get a visa. So under the government scheme, as things stand, unless you have family here in the UK who are British nationals or have the right to remain here, you cannot come from Ukraine to the UK. There will be a sponsorship scheme being opened, the details of which will be announced by Michael Gove, we're told, on Monday. But as for people who have no British family here in the UK now, there is no scheme. Now, Labour wants to change that. They want what's called an emergency visa that would mean effectively anyone who is Ukrainian and wants to come seek refuge in the UK would be able to do so. So it's widening the criteria but keeping the security.
And so what about the point that both of the main parties are actually behind public opinion on this? That public opinion, according to that YouGov poll, 75% of people would like there to be no visas needed for Ukrainians trying to get here, which is more or less the situation for most European countries, all European countries, as I understand it. We should all be standing together with a much more open, much more generous system.
It is, and when you talk to people in government, they say, look, the EU has never needed visas for Ukrainians. They have the Schengen Agreement and so on. That does mean it's different. However, that poll speaks for itself. 3/4 of British people don't agree with the two main parties, who are both of the view that visas are still needed. British public don't agree. Andrew, I would potentially suggest that if you phrase that question as should we lift all security checks, people
You
might
get a
have a
different
slightly
answer.
different view.
You're absolutely right, as ever, Ben. Caroline, very briefly, you're thinking, of course, about the Sunday paper and the Sunday news and all the rest of it. Is your instinct that this visa story has further to go?
Yes, I think it does. I mean, I think there are still so many unanswered questions about it. And as I said, I mean, I think what we're going to see is more and more scenes that are just so horrifying to watch. I've spoken to people on the ground for this Sunday's paper, witnessing it firsthand and telling the most appalling stories of suffering and horror. And so I think it will continue to build up the pressure on the
In a
government.
quarter of a mile, at Cranford Parkway interchange, take the second exit onto or slip road to Heathrow Airport, M25.
I'm very excited that it's being announced on a Monday, so that's always good news for us.
We are all ears, as ever. I mean, all ears in particular. Caroline and Ben, thanks very much indeed for that. Coming up, we're going to be hearing from an advisor to President Zelensky and asking him about the peace talks I was talking about. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr on LBC, and Amelia Cox has the news.
The Shadow Levelling Up Secretary has told LBC the government's response to the refugee crisis in Ukraine is still not good enough. Earlier, it announced a new online visa system which will open on Tuesday. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Lisa Nandy says more routes need to be open to allow people into the UK. Chelsea says it will try to operate...
Exit the roundabout onto the slip road.
Roman Abramovich was sanctioned. The Russian oligarch...
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M4.
Latest measures announced by the government. The club's main sponsor, 3, has suspended its deal with the club.
LBC Business Update.
With Direct Line Business Insurance, go direct and see if you could get a better deal.
Marks & Spencer's chief executive, Steve Rowe, is stepping down in May after 6 years in the job and a lifetime career with the business. He joined the retailer at the age of 15 before rising through the ranks and taking charge in 2016. LBC weather: spells of rain in the west tonight, drier elsewhere, a low of 2 degrees.
LBC. This is the new way to sell your car from home. This is the Motorway. Motorway's trusted dealers compete to give you the best price, meaning you could get more than you expected for your old car. And once you've found the perfect price, you can sit back and relax. We'll pick your car up from home for free. It really is that simple. Get your quote and get started at motorway.co.uk. This is the way. This is the Motorway.
How much has your business changed over the past year? Perhaps you need more flexibility and are thinking it's time to change accountants. Whether you want to spend more or less, go bigger or maybe smaller, what you should do is choose the accountants best suited to your company. In which case, arrange a free consultation at barnesrofe.com. We know that every client has different needs because we spend the time to get to know them personally. Barnes Rofe, clever accountants for business.
Control your central heating from your smartphone. Tado helps you save energy. Choose the room temperature you want it to be. Intelligent climate control for your home. Control your central heating from your smartphone. Tado.
Your home, your comfort zone. Tado, smart thermostats to help you save energy. Visit tado.com. T-A-D-O. German engineered.
Is your business truly unlimited? At 3, we think it should be. Whether you want to connect a team of 10 or 200, our business SIMs offer unlimited calls, texts, and data, all for just £7.50 each. Plus, with no data caps, when we say unlimited, we mean unlimited. Search 3 Business or visit us in store.
£7.50 when you buy 10 or more SIMs. 24-month plan excludes 20% VAT. Terms apply. See 3.co.uk/terms/business.
This is LBC Tonight with Andrew Marr.
And the time is 6:34. In a few moments, we're going to be hearing from Thomas Pickering, the former US ambassador to Russia. But first, joining me in the studio is Alexander Rodnyansky, who is an advisor to the President of Ukraine. Welcome. Now, before we start, you're based in Cambridge at the moment. You're an economic advisor, and you are heading back to Kiev as everybody else is trying to get out. You're going the other way. Just explain why.
That's right. Well, first of all, I'm on leave from Cambridge, sabbatical leave, so I'm spending that time advising the government and president, helping Ukraine. I have to be there. I have to be there with my people, and that's it.
Well, good for you. Now, I want to ask you about this very tangled issue of the peace talks, the peace negotiations, because everyone sees these terrible scenes and thinks there must be negotiations soon. But your foreign minister and Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, had talks today, and they both came out sounding a bit bleak about the prospects.
That's right. So we see that the Russian side seems to be interested in peace talks, but that's more show than anything as far as we can tell, because at the same time their officials are saying that the operation is going to plan. So they didn't move in their troops just to be moving out again so quickly. So unfortunately,
in a quarter of a mile, keep right to stay on M4.
Peace talks yielding any results so far.
Can I ask about how these peace talks might end, if they ever do end? Your President Zelensky told ABC News in America, regarding NATO, I have cooled down regarding...
Keep right to stay on M4.
After we understood that NATO is not prepared to accept Ukraine, and then he talked about some kind of wider security guarantees. Now, if...
Continue on M4 for 2 miles.
...is prepared to put the whole NATO issue to one side, as that appears to be the case, and if the Russians have effectively taken those 2 oblasts in the east, Russian-speaking bits, then surely the bones of a deal are already obvious.
Well, I wouldn't go too far at this stage. So certainly we're not giving up on our NATO ambitions in the long run. We are willing to discuss any potential security deal that's actually tangible and credible, as opposed to the Budapest Memorandum, which just yielded nothing. But there's not going to be any chopping up of Ukraine. We're not willing to compromise on our territory.
So you're not willing to lose those territories?
Of course not. And if you ask the people who live there, they're not willing to be part of any other country either.
This is difficult. I don't know quite how to put this, but looking at the size of the Russian army and the horrible, horrendous weapons they still have in their arsenal, including, the Americans are pointing out, chemical and biological weapons, all kinds of indescribable bombing systems, eventually it's very unlikely that even the heroic Ukrainian army and civilians are going to be able to beat them. Eventually this is going to end one way.
Well, that's actually not so clear. So we know that the Soviet army lost the war in Afghanistan against the Mujahideen, who didn't have anything compared to the Soviet army. The Russian army lost against Japan in 1905, which is also surprising to many. So it's not guaranteed. So far our army has done wonders. And if anything, the pressure's on the Russian side. Now you're right, of course, we know that the threat is serious, we know what the Russians are capable of, but the pressure's on them, they're running out of resources, morale is low on their side, and this is our country, so it's not guaranteed at all that they will win. If anything, they're losing actually.
In my old life, I would have to be neutral in this subject. Now I can say absolutely the very best of British luck. I hope for you personally and for your country. Very, very good to have you here, and I hope that you have a safe journey back to Kyiv, and that Kyiv remains free and safe for a very long time to come. Alexander, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now then, that was Alexander Rodnyansky, advisor to the President of Ukraine.
In a quarter of a mile, keep right to stay on M4.
To Russia, and he joins us now. Mr. Pickering, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We were talking there about the possibility of some kind of peace talk. The advisor to President Zelensky I was talking to said there is no way that Ukraine will cede any part of its territory, even if they're able to put the...
Keep right to stay on M4.
...in the short term. Do you think there is any prospect of a peace deal?
I do think there's a prospect of a peace deal, and...
Continue on M4 for 4 miles.
...and agree with him that they have slowed down the Russians, that's an important piece, that a number of us have been advising the U.S. government for weeks to, in fact, block Russian oil shipments, and this is going to happen. I have further added that we should, in fact, find a way to reduce the price of oil, because Putin should not use his invasion of Ukraine to drive up the profits from his oil sales. And that in itself is another despicable action on the part of the Russians in regard to this. But I do think that it is important that Ukraine not capitulate to divide itself. Crimea raises a specific and difficult problem. But Advisor Rodyansky wisely decided the people of the regions might well have an opportunity to decide themselves, not under Russian supervision, but with a UN-supervised election or referendum if President Zelensky and his team are prepared to go along with that. That will require a lot of definition and a lot of care. But there are two things that are important here. Increase the punishment for Putin now, And secondly, begin to put on the table in the diplomatic communications ways forward that do not capitulate, but indeed do provide an honest answer for the people of Ukraine.
Because I was very interested, one of the writers here was looking at the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1963 and said the greatness of JF Kennedy was not necessarily just in facing down the Russians, but in giving them a way out, giving them a ramp off the crisis. And however much the horror at what Putin has done in Ukraine is felt around the world, at some point it may be necessary to give him a face-saving way of climbing down.
Well, I think there's elements of that are important, but they have to be acceptable to Ukraine. Secondly, you should read President Kennedy's next to last letter to Khrushchev, when he said if Russia uses nuclear weapons in Cuba against the United States, Russia will be finished. End. And that was very hard. Now, Putin has threatened to use nuclear weapons, but merely as an adjunct to his invasion. Because he doesn't like something, or because the conventional war is not going to his liking. This is very dangerous stuff, and it is another reason why we should all join with the Ukrainians in finding an answer.
In 2 miles, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
To nuclear annihilation, and Putin plays with fire and does it very grandly. He needs to be stopped.
Looking at what we've just heard from Mr. Rodnienski and from yourself and what's going on in the ground, probably the likeliest thing is that this war is going to go on for quite a long time. It's going to have a huge effect on the world economy. You mentioned oil prices, but in other ways as well, for a very long time. What can Western governments, what can your government as well as the British government do to prepare their populations for a new reality?
Stand together. Be honest with their people, prepare them to make the sacrifices that are necessary, put on the table the tough negative sanctions and other steps that are recommended here, including reinforcing NATO to make sure that Putin does not mistake the fact that NATO's posture somehow reflects a weakness that he has somehow engendered into the problem, and then use the diplomatic process to work out answers that are fair and satisfactory.
And Ambassador Pickering, one of the problems that the Biden administration has had is the very, very poor relationship with Saudi Arabia, for very good reasons a poor relationship, but nonetheless there are indications that the US is prepared to rethink its relations with the Saudis in the short term when you're looking at the oil price and the supply of oil around the world. Is that something you expect to see?
It is, and it's something that I expect will come home in the simple balance. Do we want to take on the risks of global devastation at the end of the day, or do we want to make some short-term sacrifices in our policy, as hard as they may be, with respect to the murder of Khashoggi and some of the other things the Saudis have done that represent at best stupid decisions?
Do you think that politicians in the West so far have been unrealistic or perhaps almost too nervous?
In a 1/4 mile, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
And electorates count, and one cannot finesse them, but one has to work hard with them to explain to them why we are doing things that are necessarily hard.
Exit at junction 6.
Interesting that Mr. Putin's callous invasion of Ukraine and his treatment of Ukrainians has brought people together.
In a 1/4 mile, at the roundabout, take the 3rd exit onto Tuns Lane, A355.
When they did nothing to justify the process that Putin is engaged in, and therefore we should stay together with them. And David against Goliath is a long tradition in the West, and something that is represented by the stand that President Zelensky and his team are making. No country is perfect, obviously, but in this day and age, it is this question of who will take the risks that are best for the kind of workout that has to take place in this issue.
Well, they're being pretty heroic. Ambassador, you were ambassador in Moscow. All around the world, people are looking at Putin and trying to guess his mental state, how rational he is. In your judgment, is this a man who, in the end, will cut a deal?
I don't know, and if I were to say anything different, it would have to be made up. And I don't
Exit the roundabout onto Tons Lane.
I will tell you that I have not found him a fool, but he is stepping very close to that line right now. I do know and believe that, having watched things in Russia since the 90s very closely, that this is a man whose primary motivation is not a great Russian state as an international player. It is to preserve...
In a quarter of a mile, slight left towards Sippenham Lane.
And so much of this you have to evaluate that way. And his selection of nationalist policies, of spheres of influence, of military invasion, of splitting Europe and the United States are all playing to the nationalist crowd in Russia, which likes somehow still Mr. Putin.
Ambassador, thank you very much. It seems to me sometimes, despite our very clever screens and our mobile phones and our electronics and so forth, we are living through the...
Slight left towards Sippenham Lane.
Coming up, I'm going to be joined in the studio by Finland's ambassador to the UK and asking him about his country's NATO ambitions. You're listening to Andrew Marr. It's 6:45.
Continue for 1.5 miles.
Travel, I'm Dave Goff. There are queues in Fulham on Fulham Broadway eastbound after an investigation earlier at Harwood Road. The Strand Underpass northbound stays shut. That's because of an overheight lorry, so there are queues over Waterloo Bridge. There are delays in Aldgate. The A11 Whitechapel High Street stays closed both ways between Commercial Road and Mansell Street after the fire on Monday. On the Tube, there are severe delays on the District Line between Edgware Road and Wimbledon. And on the trains, Greater Anglia services are suspended at Broxbourne.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
For Roman Abramovich tonight, blue is certainly the colour, but will football still be the game at Chelsea? Is the government right to freeze his assets?
Ian Dale on LBC.
I race for life for my mum, who was diagnosed with bowel cancer.
I race for life for my best friend, who we lost too soon.
I race for life for my dad, who's living with prostate cancer.
I race for life for everyone facing cancer.
Who will you race for life for? Raise money for life-saving cancer research. Sign up to your local event at raceforlife.org. And together, we will beat cancer. In partnership with Tesco.
This is LBC.
It's lights out and we're live on Sky Sports F1.
I need more power, man. Lewis is right on your tail, man.
For a new season, new lineups, and new cars. Watch every race live on Sky Sports F1 for £18 extra a month. It's only live once. Season starts 18th of March.